Welcome back again. It's Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent Playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Sheryl.
And we're talking prog today, prog of the 80s. I know, Sheryl, you've been looking forward to this for such a long time. If you've been following us, and my gosh, how many episodes have we done now? We're a few years
This is our
into this.
70th episode.
Wow. How many years? It's been like 3 years?
It's been 3 years, yeah.
And we're not even halfway through.
I know. We're going to be retired by the time we're done with this.
So again, our project is to go through the musical history of our generation, which is Generation X. Sheryl and I both born in 1969. And we're starting from our earliest musical memories, building a playlist as we go along that will peak in our high school years and then taper off to young adulthood. 1999 is where we're going to cut off our project. I think that's the perfect time to cut off this exercise is, when you're on the verge of 30.
Yeah, and then we can party like it's 1999.
Yes, there you go. So we're talking prog this, and we're going to specifically focus on a couple of albums, but really primarily one, which was very impactful, I think, in both of our musical histories. And that was Yes's 90125, which came out in the fall of 1983. Genesis released their self-titled album shortly after that, which is a big one as well. And so now we're starting to get into a period of time where I'm, as a young lad, starting to build my music collection on store-bought tapes. So I know I had both of those albums on tape initially before I had them on CD.
Probably not the best format to listen to something of great sound quality, but...
Yeah, no, it's certainly, CDs were a revelation when they came out. If you were used to listening to your music on store-bought tapes, it could sound good. I mean, if you had a really good system, I remember Nakamichi tape decks were considered the great, not that we ever had anything like that. But,
well, what I equate cassette tapes to is in the car,
right.
And my Walkman back then. It was more just for portability purposes.
Yeah, purely for convenience. I want to go back and kick my young self. I stopped buying records pretty early on and bought tapes instead, and as far as collectible value, the records have persevered much better. Although for some reason, cassette tapes seem to have a cult following.
I cannot understand that except for nostalgic value is the only thing I can see. Like, tapes are a pain in the ass. You have to fast forward, you have to rewind. They don't sound good. Like, there's nothing of quality in that regard except just the whole kitschiness of them. And really, I didn't buy a lot of store-bought cassettes because I got a stereo system when I was in 6th grade. And so I was just recording cassettes from my albums, so I didn't have very many cassettes.
Well, that's why I want to kick my young self. It's like, why didn't you just buy records and tape them? You had the facility to do that. Why didn't you just buy the records, tape them, then you'd have the record?
They sounded so much better doing it that way too, and then you'd have the record and the cassette.
I would have been clueless about it. I didn't know the records sounded better than tapes. I mean, it was all the same to me at that time.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really either. I didn't care about sound until we started doing this podcast, really. Because,
oh, really?
Yeah, because I was always like, I don't care what it sounds like. I just want to hear the music. And I know you were always much more dialed into the sound quality.
Well, not always, but I mean longer than you.
Since we've been talking about music. Yeah. But I'm getting more interested in good sound quality. If there's any genre, this would be a genre to want to listen to high quality recordings.
Oh, yes. One of the early CDs in my collection was 90125. Now, that was really my gateway into prog, particularly the music of Yes. I knew nothing about Yes when this album came out. I just said, it's a cool new band. I've never heard of this band. It's cool sound. I bought the record and loved it, and then started learning more about the style of music. And, they call this prog, right? And then, I started picking up reference books at this time and seeing other bands that were described as progressive or prog and say, I want to check this out. And it just started off on a lifetime of appreciation. But this album sounded amazing. It sounded incredible.
Yes.
And the early CD really made a good system sparkle. I'd say if the early CDs that I bought, there were 3 in particular where I was like, boy, this really sounds good. This album, Synchronicity, which also came out in 1983 by the Police. And then I didn't buy too many current albums when I was first buying CDs in the late 80s, but one of the earliest ones I bought was the first Sugar Cubes record, Life's Too Good, because I saw them on Saturday Night Live and I was just knocked sideways by Björk. I was like, wow, this is so different and so cool. Their records really sounded good too. Those
Hmm.
first ones, at least, sounded great on CD. But yeah, so I initially would have had this on tape. And I don't know if it was Owner of a Lonely Heart that sold it for me. I think maybe after the Leave It single came out in 84, that's probably what prompted me to get it. But I know I bought this tape via the RCA Record Club when I was still
Hmm.
part of that. And it opened the doors to this world of amazing music, prog, which, was really at its peak in the early 70s. But we're looking at the 80s now, and this is a very interesting. I know you've been
Yeah.
fascinated by this for years. These prog bands of the 70s, how they adapted their sound for the 1980s. And I think there's this knee-jerk feeling that, oh yeah, punk rock and new wave came around and just wiped all these old dinosaur bands off the map. They were no longer relevant and nobody cared anymore. Well, the fact of the matter is, the bands that were at Prog's top table, most of them adapted quite well to the changes. And they were ready for it. And I think a lot of that had to do with the keyboard technology that started to dominate the sound of the 80s, because prog bands were on the absolute cutting edge of synthesizer technology in the 70s, and they were ready for these changes.
Yeah, this is such an interesting time. There was definitely a change where these 70s prog bands were kind of being forced in some ways from record labels or just, the sign of the times to pare down their songs and not be doing these epic 7-10 minute, whole side length songs, and actually start having singles, songs that are, or at least like 3 to 4 minutes long. So that was a change that was happening. And, Rush was right on the forefront of that, going back to like moving pictures, like they were doing more single length songs.
Right.
And so, you can see these changes are happening. Genesis, obviously, one that really, and we've talked about this a lot because we've had other Genesis songs on our playlist where they've started to really pull back from the prog leanings. And a lot of that was brought on by Phil Collins becoming their lead singer. And then, they just started moving more into that direction. Yes, really didn't do that until 90125, because even the album before, which we've talked about quite a bit.
And we should revisit that here, because Drama sets the stage for 90125 because they bring Trevor Horn into their orbit as a band member.
Yes.
Which everybody retrospectively says it didn't really work. Well, it worked for me. I loved that album, and I
love that album
still
too.
get a kick out of that. I loved it at the time when I discovered it. I discovered it well after 90125, and honestly, I don't think I picked up Drama until I had really discovered the whole Yes catalog, the older classic Yes stuff from the early 70s.
Drama was way late for me because of those stupid books that we paid attention to that said it's terrible. You don't want to listen to this. This is the worst, and I was always, the Rolling Stone record guy was like my Bible. And so whatever it said, I did, which meant stay far away from Drama. And then when I did discover it, I was like, oh my God, this album is amazing. I love this album. And it was after I also had discovered the Buggles and how much I really enjoyed their two albums, which bookend Drama. And really, I think what was the least successful about Drama was that they had already had a tour booked before John Anderson and Rick Wakeman left the band.
The interpersonal relationship of this band, it's really hard to get a grip on it, because you would think that John Anderson and Rick Wakeman would be the ones butting heads the most.
Yeah, they're the most polar opposite. John Anderson's a vegetarian. He's very airy-fairy. He basically lives in the stars, and Rick Wakeman is like the most meat-eating, beer-guzzling, just like crass and hilarious person. Yeah. And yeah, they seem like such polar opposites.
Well, plus you've got that aspect, and then Rick Wakeman is this just brilliant, virtuosic, classically trained musician. Yes. And John Anderson is by far the least musically gifted of the group. I mean,
although he is vocally gifted, but yes, he does not play a musical instrument. He doesn't have music training in that sense.
So you got to think this guy, Rick Wakeman, who came out of the Royal College of Music and is virtuoso keyboard player, ridiculously talented musician. And you've got this amateur Anderson who could barely play an instrument at all, yet he's kind of leading the band and dictating to everybody else what they should be playing. And very exacting in what he's looking for, although he can't read a note of music or barely play. You would think they would just be totally butting heads, but they seem to have formed this alliance toward the end of the 70s, and they both departed the band at the same time before the Drama album.
Yeah, and, going back, it's Chris Squire, Bill Bruford, and John Anderson are the core members initially.
Right.
And then
Peter Banks on the guitar. Yeah.
And Tony Kaye on keyboards for their first 2 albums. And then Peter Banks leaves and Steve Howe comes in. Tony Kaye he's on the Yes album. Then once Tony Kaye leaves and Rick Wakeman comes in, now you have really the most classic lineup of Yes, which is Bill Bruford, Chris Squire, John Anderson, Steve Howe, and Rick Wakeman.
Yeah. Lasts for 2 albums.
Yes. Which of their classic albums are their most popular albums, Fragile and Close to the Edge.
Personally, my preference is for the Yes album with Tony Kaye, just because I like the Hammond sound.
The Hammond, yeah. And I mean, that's the other thing, switching from Tony Kaye to Rick Wakeman. Tony Kaye is a very meat and potatoes player. He likes the Hammond. That's his sound. That's what he does. And Rick Wakeman is has flourishes and, cape wearing and playing all the different technology, all the Moogs, everything that's there. He has the biggest rig. He plays every note all the time. And so it's great and he's amazing, but it's just such a different style.
My favorite part of the live album, the Yes Songs album, is his solo showcase for the 6 Wives from his solo. It's not even a Yes, it's from his solo album. It's just remarkable. Yeah.
He is incredible. He played on David Bowie, Life on Mars. I mean, one of the most beautiful piano pieces of any rock song. He did a lot of sessions. He has probably 100 solo albums.
The piano on Morning is Broken by Cat Stevens. That's Rick Wakeman.
Yep. So, incredibly talented guy. Big presence.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes.
He's a large man.
He is. And once he came in, all of a sudden, Yes did get a lot bigger and a lot more flamboyant and exaggerated and epic. At this point, Alan White joined the band. So Bill Bruford left after Close to the Edge. And then they did Tales from Topographic Oceans.
When's the last time you listened to it?
It's one of my favorites.
I
love that album. Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I don't dislike it, but I've never owned that. I had it on tape. I had just about every Yes album on tape at one point. And that's one I've never picked up on CD. I like the first track on that quite a bit, but the rest of it just kind of drifts away from me. I can't even remember the motifs.
Each side is one song, and it's a double album. So they're all 15, 20 minutes long. And
Soft Machine had already done that, by the way, with their 3rd album.
Yes. And so that right there just turned a lot of people off, and critics definitely off. They were like, this is just excessive. The only one that I don't really listen to that much is the second side, but I love 1, 3, and 4. And there's some really cool drum stuff that Alan White wrote. I think that everybody kind of has a different idea of what their favorite era of Yes is or albums of Yes, but there's never really been, except for maybe Tormato, a bad Yes album. They are all such amazing musicians. They just, no matter what they do, it's still going to be listenable at least, and possibly just amazing and incredible. So Relayer is the next album after Topographic Oceans, in which Rick Wakeman now leaves the band, and they bring in Patrick Moraz on keyboards, which gives Relayer a different sound. Yeah.
Wakeman had the most solo success of any band member, and he started focusing on his own work.
Yeah, The 6 Wives of Henry VIII. That was a huge album. And he had Bill Bruford playing on that. He had Chris Squire playing on that. So it sounds very Yes-like. But yeah, his solo career was taking off. And part of the reason why Rick left the band, not only because his solo career was taking off, but recording Topographic Oceans was so painful for them. I mean, it was excruciating, especially for Rick, because that's when a lot of his...
This is John's baby too, right? I mean,
yes. Which is why there was a lot of friction there, because this is where a lot of those differences that they had in personality were really coming to the forefront. And Rick was just getting so frustrated with how long it was taking to record these songs. And John can be a bit challenging to work with as far as he has a vision and he wants it to be a certain way. And I think the thing is that when you have someone who is trying to orchestrate these long pieces of music that are really challenging, and he's the least musically inclined of the entire band, it kind of makes it hard to take that sort of direction, I think, from someone. And he's, he comes across as being, I wouldn't say he's like egotistical.
Oh,
but
he's called himself a Napoleon. He's a little tiny
Yes,
guy, and
he is.
he's
He's 5'5".
yeah,
He's
yeah.
tiny. Yeah. He's the lead singer of the band. So, there is definitely something where people kind of look at the lead singer as being a leader of a band. But when you have musicians that are some of the best musicians in the world playing in a band with you, and you can see it in there's a documentary, Yes Years documentary, and there's film footage of all of them recording Topographic Oceans. And Rick is just so frustrated and so annoyed. He was just so over it. And I think a lot of it was that he was over John Anderson.
Yeah.
So he left after that album and they brought on Patrick Moraz. That was just one album, Relayer.
I think the peak, yes, is side one of Relayer, The Gates of Delirium. That is, I think that's their most epic achievement musically. But that sound of that album is grating.
Yeah.
The music's incredible, but the sound quality is so bright. It's not always a pleasant listen. But he's dazzling on that album.
He is.
Yeah.
He's incredible. And he's played with Bill Bruford. They've done a couple hours with just them two together. And he's done a lot of other session work. And yeah, he's very talented.
I didn't realize he was in the Moody Blues on the long distance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. He was on Long Distance Voyager.
Yeah.
Then the next album, Going for the One, Rick Wakeman comes back. Now that's an album that I have just never been able to get into. Do you like that album?
Yeah, me neither. I really haven't listened to it. I mean, so there's great stuff on there. Wondrous Stories is one of the most beautiful melodies they ever recorded.
Yeah.
Awaken is cool.
Yeah.
Going for the One rocks.
It's one of the hardest rocking songs they've had, but there's something about that album.
Yeah, sound again, bright.
So tinny. It's literally, I cannot listen to the song Going for the One because it hurts. It is like painful to my ears because it's got this slight and actually that's one of the cool things I think that Steve Howe did that not a lot of other players were doing in Prog. He uses the slide guitar and that in that song.
Yeah, lap slide. Yeah.
Yeah, which sounds really cool in that song, I think. But
I mean, he can make any stringed instrument absolutely sing. He may be the most talented guitarist in the rock field.
Yeah.
Just chops for days.
Mm-hmm. And, I think that album does have a lot of really good songs on it. Maybe it's more the sound that's always deterred me.
I think that's part of the problem, too, is Steve Howe. The sounds he's going for on the guitar are super trebly and not pleasant. I mean, he's an incredibly gifted musician, but his tone is not pleasant on the ears in this period.
No, and I always thought maybe it was just me that felt that way, but because people seem to like this album, I think. But I just haven't been able to get on board with Steve Howe's. You're right, it's Steve Howe's guitar sound and tone. But I think overall, it's a good album. And then comes Tormato in '78. Which this is definitely where they are more under the influence of John Anderson. There's songs on this album that are shorter, like Don't Kill the Whale, that sound more like a John Anderson solo project to me. And they just their hearts aren't in it. I mean, it really just feels like they're tapped out. And the album is the one that I think, most Yes fans feel is their weakest in their catalog.
You need to be more specific there. The weakest of the original run of albums. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. See, I forget how many albums they do after,
right.
It's like Todd Rundgren. When we were talking about Todd Rundgren, I'm like, oh yeah, I only think about the albums that go up to like the 80s. I forget that they, both Yes and bands like that have like 10 or 15 albums after that I just paid no attention to.
I've never listened to any of it.
I have, but not nearly as much as the classic stuff. So I think that every Yes album has its fans, except maybe Tormato.
Yep, I'm definitely with you there. You probably like it more than I do.
I do. There are songs that I like on it. It's not a good album overall, and as you go from, Close to the Edge, which probably is their peak, I would say.
Those 3 albums together, I mean,
Yeah.
most hardcore Yes fans, they may not be their favorites. They may have a soft spot like you do for Topographic Oceans or Relayer or whatever. There's stuff I love on the first 2 albums. I really have a soft spot for their second album, Time and a Word, which is generally critically panned, and the band kind of looks down their noses at it too, with like a failed experiment, I think, is generally how they view it.
And I haven't really listened to the first 2 albums that much.
Oh, I love Time and a Word. Love it. But really their peak is that 3 album run from the Yes album to Close to the Edge. That's the pinnacle of Yes music.
And like the classic Yes compilation CD, which probably a ton of people had, those are all taken from those 3 albums. All those songs are taken from those 3 albums. So yeah, I would say that that's what people consider the pinnacle of Yes.
Yep.
And so this is the end of the run of the classic lineup. And now, like you said, you have Rick Wakeman and John Anderson. The 2 that are the most polar opposite are the 2 that actually decide to leave the band at the same time. And this is the first time that this band has not had John Anderson. And John Anderson is a very integral part of their sound. I mean, he has a vocal sound and style and range that is like no other, maybe Geddy Lee, but Geddy Lee's sound is so different than his, his tone is so much different.
Really is a unique sound. It's hard to find a comparison.
Yeah, it's so warm. And so, especially being in such a high register, it still feels like it just has such a ease and warmth to it.
I think the vocal peak for Yes, for John Anderson, the Soon segment at the end of Gates of Delirium, so gorgeous, just beautiful.
Beautiful. Yes. So now we're up to drama, which, you mentioned, you've got all of a sudden Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes from the Buggles come into play. Chris Allen and Steve were writing songs together. I think they brought Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes in to produce initially, or just to work with them on songwriting. And then they became full-fledged members of the band. Trevor Horn now all of a sudden is stepping into John Anderson's shoes. And, John Anderson is like an idol to him. I can't imagine hardly anybody being able to do this. They've been able to find singers in the, the more current years, but they've always been people that are like from Yes cover bands, or people that really have honed their John Anderson style.
And they are the Buggles.
They're the Buggles.
Those 2 guys are the Buggles. They've already had the hit with Video Killed the Radio Star on our playlist, of course.
Yes.
So this had to be somewhat disturbing to longtime Yes fans who were probably, a lot of them had a distaste for punk and new wave, found it to be simplistic. And so they're like, so what? Yes is a new wave band now? What's happening here? No John Anderson? What?
Yeah, in the past, when they've brought other band members in, they're bringing someone in from the prog sphere.
They're substituting one classically trained virtuoso for another, basically. Yeah.
But bringing in the Buggles, which, are a new wave band, like that was definitely something that I just think people were not on board. And when the album came out, I don't think a lot of people really gave it a chance at the time. Yeah. I think they just dismissed it. And then they had already had a tour scheduled before the album was out. And so then Trevor had to step in and play the role of John Anderson in the live setting. And that was just like, I guess, they say that the tour actually went well in the States. People were receptive. But, Trevor Horn, I like his voice a lot.
Sure,
and he can sing high.
Yeah.
He can probably pull a lot of it off. I think the problem is that, and he says this, is that it's not sustainable. It's not something I can do night after night after night on a long US and UK tour. There's just no way. So that was the biggest issue, I think. It's just being able to sustain that. So they did pretty well on the US leg of the tour. And then when they went over to Europe, I guess that's where they were just like, people were not accepting. And it was really hard on Trevor Horn. Like, I mean, it nearly broke him. I think that they were proud of the album, rightfully so. They went on tour, they did it, they finished it. And I think Trevor Horn was just like, that was excruciating in a lot of ways. And I just don't want anything to do with that again. So, the band then just kind of faded away.
So this is 1980 when the Drama album comes out.
Yeah. But Chris and Alan were still making music together, and they're the rhythm section. There's two things that happen right now that are integral to 90125 and just keeping Yes alive. Because if these things didn't happen, I think Yes would have just kind of been the classic rock band.
Yeah. Well, they were ready. They were going to retire. Yes. Yes was no longer a thing.
Yeah. So Trevor Rabin, I love him so much. And I have grown to love him so much more doing this deep dive really into this album and into this era of Yes. First of all, he's just a virtuoso guitarist and piano. He's an incredible musician, period. He grew up in South Africa. He grew up in a musical family. He was like a concert pianist as a young child, winning competitions, but he's in South Africa where there's not going to be a lot of exposure. He started a band called Rabbit. Well, he was doing a lot of sessions first. He actually was doing sessions as a teenager, and he started a band called Rabbit that became huge in South Africa. They had 2 albums with him.
2 B's, 2 T's, just like Eddie Rabbit.
Yeah.
Which makes it a little hard to look up.
That's true. Whenever you look up Rabbit, all you get is Eddie Rabbit. Yeah. And I hadn't really listened to Rabbit much before doing this research. I love them. Did you listen to their albums?
A little bit.
I think they're great. It's very Beatley power pop. And then there's like ballads. They sound a lot like ELO at times. Their first album, which is called...
They look like the Bay City Rollers.
Yes, I was going to say, and it's called Boys Will Be Boys is the name of the album. And it's got them like all, piling on top of each other, like a pillow fight and on the cover. And yes, they look like the Bay City Rollers.
Very glam in their appearance.
And Trevor is a good looking guy.
Yes.
And
beautiful singing voice too.
Yes, amazing. So he's the lead singer of this band. I would totally recommend listening to this album and their second album called Croak and a Grunt in the Night, which also has them all naked on the cover. The front cover, Trevor is totally...
This sounds like straight out of Spinal Tap, right?
Yes, it's just a full body shot of him. I mean, it's kind of blurry and it's got this weird sort of orangey look to it, but with a guitar strapped over, covering anything.
Over the naughty bits.
Yes, and then you flip it over and all the other guys are naked on the back in different positions that are hiding, anything you really shouldn't see. But it's just like,
it was the 70s.
Back in the 70s when that was a thing. Yeah, the first album came out in 75, the second one in 77. They're both really, really good albums. I really like the first one a lot. Second one is good too. That one has a little bit more like boogie rock and glam sound to it, but definitely go check those out. They became huge in South Africa. And, Trevor, being the lead singer, guitarist, lead songwriter of this band, he also at that time was working a lot with Mutt Lang.
Mutt, South African too.
Yes. So he was working with him, in sessions, and he was actually pretty influenced by him and his sound and like his drum sound, and which we've talked about a lot with Def Leppard and AC/DC. So Trevor leaves Rabbit, leaves South Africa, and moves to England, thinking, I'm a star. I'm a star in South Africa. I'm just going to be able to step right into the music scene here and everybody's going to be knocking on my door. And
well, with his looks, his prodigious musical ability, his voice, you would have thought, sure thing, right?
Yeah, that didn't necessarily happen. But, he was meeting people in the business and writing songs this whole time. So he had a catalog of songs written, waiting for something to happen. And he met David Geffen, and he signed him for a development deal, which during that time, Trevor was just writing songs for about 6 months. And those are songs that would end up being on 90125 eventually. Geffen had a couple projects in mind, and one of them was Keith Emerson, Jack Bruce, and Cozy Powell.
Wow.
And Trevor. And Trevor knew Keith Emerson. He had worked with Jack Bruce. Jack played on his solo album. Oh, because he had actually put out a solo album at that point, too, before he was signed to Geffen. He put out 3, actually.
Listen to a little bit of that first one. There's a lot of interesting stuff on there, but again, sound quality-wise, a little dirty.
Yeah. I think Wolf was the one that had Jack Bruce. Simon Phillips was on drums. Man for Man played on it. And he also, did you know that he produced Man for Man Chance?
No. Great album.
Yeah, so he had produced that album in 81. He had put out 3 solo albums. So anyway, that was one of the groups they were trying to get together, and that just never really happened. And then the other band that Geffen was really pushing Trevor toward was a band with John Wetton from King Crimson, Carl Palmer, and Steve Howe. And
What could that band possibly be?
Yeah.
On Geffen Records.
Yes. And Trevor knew John Wetton. And so John called him up. And so they brought Trevor in, and he did come in and play with them. And he said that it just didn't feel right. The chemistry wasn't good. And
they're looking at him as the keyboard player in this group rather than the guitar. Well, obviously, Steve Howe's the guitarist.
No, they're looking for him as the lead singer in this band.
So John Wetton was just going to be the bass player?
John Wetton was going to be the bass player.
So Jeff Downs is already a part of the picture at this point?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about Jeff Downs. Yeah. So yeah, we've got Jeff Downs on keyboards, John Wetton on bass, Steve Howe on guitar, Carl Palmer on drums, and then Trevor. Trevor comes in with this whole guitar rig. They play for a bit, and then after he says to John, it was really awkward there with Steve. Like, I felt like this was not cool. And he says, well, actually, Steve was under the impression that you were just going to be the lead singer. And he was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense now. So he was like, you know what? John, who has an amazing voice, and really, he's like, you just should be singing the songs. You be the lead singer. I'm going to back off, so he does. But I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that Geffen had impressions of him going into Asia. So then, Asia now becomes huge and has big hit singles. And then once Trevor decides that that's not going to be what he wants to do, Geffen drops him. So now he's without a label. He's just kind of trying to figure out what to do. And he gets a call from one of the record label execs from Atlantic. And I've got a project here with Chris Squire and Alan White from Yes. And they're, looking for a singer, songwriter, guitarist.
Well, you should mention that before Trevor Rabin comes on board, they'd already mooted a project with Jimmy Page.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Chris and Alan had started working with Jimmy Page, and they were thinking of starting a band called XYZ. Yes, Zeppelin. I don't know if they actually recorded anything, but they had like 6 songs that they had been working on, and they were trying to get Robert Plant involved. He had a solo career going at this time, too.
He's pretty much done with anything related to Zeppelin at this point.
And he was not interested in the songs. That then faded away. So Trevor Rabin meets with Chris and Alan, and they just hit it off right away. They do a little jam session, and they all say that it's terrible, but it feels good. And they all really like each other, and they really mesh together. They just know this is going to work. So Trevor had already written all these songs, and he had demoed them. And the other big piece of what made this album and made Yes of the 80s was bringing Trevor Horn back as a producer. And Trevor Horn, he's got a really entertaining autobiography. And he talks about how his wife was like, no, there's no way you're doing this. We went through such hell when you were in Yes. You are not going back to those old fogies that are like, and at this point, Trevor Horn is riding high because he just produced ABC's Lexicon of Love, which was a big hit. He produced a couple songs for Dollar, Mirror Mirror is one of them that were like, number 1 UK singles. And so he was a very hot producer at that time.
And he'd had his own hit song with the Buggles.
He had his own hit song with the Buggles. So, he was a little bit wary to go into this project, but he really, really loved working with Chris Squire. And he just, had always really admired him. He loved the rhythm section of Chris and Alan. So he decided to go for it. Once Trevor Horn came into play, Trevor Rabin was playing him the demos, and he was kind of like a little bit lukewarm about it. But then he heard Owner of a Lonely Heart, and he was like, the verses were rubbish. They were terrible. And that's the thing about Trevor Rabin. And he's kind of comes from that sort of butt rock background where the lyrics are not great. They're all just kind of pedestrian a bit, and, about love songs or, women or whatever. And And that's sort of what the verses were like for Owner of a Lonely Heart. But he heard the chorus and he was like, this is a hit just based on the chorus. And Trevor was like, no, this is not for Yes. This is something else. And he had already played that demo for other record labels who had turned it down and said, though we think your voice has top 40 appeal, we think Owner of a Lonely Heart is too left field. So he was just kind of had it tucked away and wasn't really thinking that this was going to be something for the band. But Trevor Horn was like, no, you are recording this. And if you want me on this album, we have to do this song or I won't do it. And they kind of shelved it for like 6 months or 6 or 9 months where they were working on the rest of the album. They recorded the whole album basically. And at that point, they still didn't feel like they had a single, and the record label was really pushing them for a single. Trevor started trying to revive bringing Owner of a Lonely Heart back in, Trevor Horn. So he and Trevor Rabin rewrote the verses, and Trevor Horn actually has like a 15% writing credit on this song because he wrote the verses. And now at this point, they've basically recorded the entire album with Trevor Rabin as the lead singer, and Trevor Horn starts feeling like we need something else going on here to make this a little bit more interesting. And so he suggests bringing in John Anderson, which John at that time had been doing solo projects. He had just put out an album in 82. He was touring and doing some Yes songs on his tour. And
he had an album that came out earlier in the year with Vangelis.
He's had collection. 3 albums with Vangelis over the last 3 years. Yeah. And one came out in 80, I think 82 and 83. So he was recording with Vangelis, and he also had a couple solo albums too on top of that. Chris called him up and said, we've got some new stuff. Would you be interested in listening to it? And so he met with him. The first song he played him was Leave It. And John was like, yeah, I'm definitely interested. So they brought him back into the fold.
They're still not calling themselves Yes at this point.
No, the band is actually called Cinema. Yeah. That's what they had initially come into this with, the idea that it would be called Cinema. And they also had brought Tony Kaye back, the original keyboardist. And when they brought Tony Kaye back in, now, they've got 3 members of Yes in the band. There were a couple other bands called Cinema, though, that were pushing back on them using that name, for one thing. And then they brought John back, and it was like, there's a lot of good reasons to call this band Yes. Number 1, we've got 4 out of the original members in the band.
Right.
Number 2, Yes, even though they have fallen out of favor, we have a reputation that will follow us, and, it's going to give them a lot more exposure.
And they never stopped being a big touring draw. Even when the albums weren't selling as well or weren't highly regarded, they were still a huge concert draw whenever they toured the U.S.
But, they had definitely fallen out of favor. The whole genre was kind of becoming passé. So bringing it on as Yes again, I think Trevor Rabin especially had trepidation about that, because he was like, I feel like we need to be distancing ourselves from that band. But they ended up using the name, and they brought John in, and he ended up singing lead vocals on most of the songs. But one of the things that is so cool about this album is the work between the vocals with John, Trevor, and Chris Squire, who is also an amazing vocalist.
Secret weapon.
Yes, and sings on every Yes song. He's in there, and his voice is actually very similar to John's. He has a very high register.
Yep.
He's
never had a lead vocal line on a Yes album ever, did he?
No.
Even in the later years, I don't think he ever did. I don't know.
No.
But he always was there in the harmonies.
But he has a great solo album that came out in 75, I think, called Fish Out of Water. Love it. If you're a Yes fan, you have to have that album because it sounds just like Yes.
Is that the best solo Yes album, by the way?
Yeah, I'd say it's my favorite.
So this was mid-70s. They all put out, Steve Howe had Beginnings. John Anderson put out his first solo album, Elias Sunhillow.
I love all of John Anderson's solo albums. He, to me, is kind of like Paul McCartney and Todd Rundgren, where I don't care what he does. It could be the worst thing in the world to someone else, but I still love it. I love everything he does. His first one is more Yes-like, Elias of Sunhillow, but then he's got every album after that he does. It's way light. It's much more airy, fairy, light, and in the clouds music, but I still love it. So yeah, they've all done quite a few solo albums. Anyway, going to the vocals, oh my gosh, the 3 of them together. And it's so cool the way John Anderson comes in, and he does take over lead vocals on a lot of this stuff. But Trevor Rabin sings lead too, not full songs, but some songs he sings lead on the verses, some
Yeah.
songs because it was already fully recorded by the time they brought John in. They just put John's vocals over everything that was already there.
It's really surprising the extent to which there isn't one song that Trevor Rabin is the lead vocalist. As you mentioned, It's just a bridge or a chorus or one verse in a song. Otherwise, John Anderson dominates the album with lead vocals.
Which really says a lot to me about Trevor Rabin, because this is his project. Really, these are his songs.
Yeah, most of the songs are from his demos, right?
Yeah. And he's already recorded this album, and he's always been the lead singer in every band he's been in, or every project he's done. And he has a great voice. And his voice is also very high, which I think is why all three voices complement each other so much too. But he has quite a range, and it's a much different sound than John's. It's a tougher sound. It's a more rock sound. But I think that says a lot about him, that he felt for the sake of the music that, yeah, this works better, with John's voice. This is really working. And he kind of stepped back from that role as the lead vocalist. I listened to this on headphones for the first time. You listen to things on headphones a lot, don't you?
Yes. Yeah.
See, I don't really ever do that. And I just kind of started doing that recently.
Headphones, not earbuds.
No, like actual headphones.
Actual headphones.
Cover your ears and bring the sound right into your head. This album sounds so amazing. So amazing.
Yeah. Sound quality and it's a production masterclass by Trevor Horn. I mean, it's absolutely at the top of his craft at this point. This album is interesting to me because I loved it at the time. It was really cutting edge modern rock, modern AOR. I mean, utilizing the newest technology, lots of synthesizers, early sampling technology, beautifully recorded, well played, obviously great musicians across the board. Loved it at the time, loved it start to finish. My favorite track, we'll talk about later on when we get into 1984, because it was a 1984 single. You've already referenced it, Leave It, which is just a incredible piece of production.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the vocals. It's not just the three voices, John Anderson, Trevor Rabin, and Chris Squire, but it's the producer and how he records the vocals and how he places them in the soundscape and pans them. That's why it's a great headphone listen.
Yeah, there's a lot of panning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, particularly on that song. I would fall out of love with this album, though, a few years later. It's just lyrics.
Yeah.
When they revamped the album, you mentioned Trevor Rabin's lyrics are pretty basic, but you said butt rock, and it's a great reference. John Anderson, very different lyricist, but annoying in a different way, because it's word salad. It's where he's using words as musical notes, not for meaning of the words themselves. Yeah. And it worked with classic Yes, with the epic songs. It fit in these more basic, streamlined, rhythm-oriented tracks. And that's really the big shift of the 70s prog titans going into the 80s and having success, like Yes, Genesis, who we're going to talk about in a bit, King Crimson with their trio of albums in the early 80s. The emphasis is more on rhythm than elaborate arrangements and melodies, just tying into modern tastes at the time. And it's that setting that makes the lyrics stand out like a sore thumb. Some of these songs are hard to listen to because of the corny lyrics.
You're more distracted by the music and the older stuff because there's so much going on. Yes, and it's so intricate. Right. When John says stuff like, mountains come out of the sky and they stand there. It's like, okay, sure, mountains can stand. Why not?
But it's a Roundabout, it's incredible to think that Roundabout was a hit single. It's such a complex song.
It was pared down a lot. I mean, it was definitely edited. But yeah, when you get these more tight pop rock songs, the lyrics are more noticeable. Like, you can't just ignore them.
That's why going back, and I've listened to 90125 a bunch of times now recently, and the Genesis self-titled album, which we're going to talk about in a moment. The lyrics are so much better on the Genesis album, which is probably why I prefer that album now, even though classic Yes is the pinnacle of prog for me. That 3-album run, particularly the Yes album, which is one of my favorite albums, period. But at the time, I really dug this album. It was the gateway. It was the gateway. The next step was getting the classic Yes tape and the first introduction to the music of those three albums, the Yes album, Fragile, Close to the Edge, 71, 72, and just blew my little
Yeah.
mind. Blew my little mind. It was the Hammond organ sound that I just really dug, which makes me like the Yes album more than the others, even though Rick Wakeman is a far superior musician to Tony Kaye. I just love the heavy Hammond sound of Tony Kaye, which is why I'm really getting into early Deep Purple right now too, because of John Lord. I mean, God,
Yeah.
that overamped Hammond organ through a Leslie speaker, just the sound, just love that sound. The percussive feeling of that Hammond sound, just love it.
I like the Moog. I like the twinklings and tinklings of Rick Wakeman and the otherworldly stuff. And like, that's what I gravitate to.
I think Yes is kind of underrated musically as a groove band. They can groove like mothers. You go back and look at the old Yes. Tony Kaye's still with them. They did the Beat Club show in Germany.
Yeah.
It's just this incredible archive of live music recordings from the turn of the 70s.
Yes.
And the groove on Yours Is No Disgrace is just incredible. I mean, Chris Squire is one of the greatest bass players in the history of rock. And, you know, sadly, he's no longer with us. But whether he was working with Bruford or Alan White, they could lay down a killer groove.
Yeah.
As well as playing all these knotty, tricky, intricate time changes and rhythms. But I think that element is underrated. And that helped them transition to the 80s, where, again, the emphasis is more on more basic rhythms, more grooves than, you know, elaborate arrangements. And they could easily slot in there, just like Genesis with Phil Collins.
Yeah.
You know, Stuart Copeland, super groovy. I mean, Police, they had some prog elements to their sound, certainly, but a lot of their music was very rhythm oriented. He could keep a groove going while adding all these tremendous little flourishes and cymbal work and tasty, you know, not so much fills with Stuart Copeland. It's more about
Stuart Copeland's cymbal work is really what sets him apart, I think. Yeah, and especially the hi-hats. He does have flourishes there, but Alan White is kind of like that too. And really, I think that helped them with Trevor Rabin on 90125, because I think Trevor Rabin tends to be more of just kind of a straight ahead rock guy. And even though he's doing some very intricate work and a lot of guitar gymnastics, his songs tend to be just pretty straight ahead rock. So I feel like Chris Squire especially really elevates 90125 into a place that would not have been like that if Trevor had done this as a solo album or with, you know, another band, these same songs. I feel like half of this album is great and the other half is just kind of okay.
Yeah.
But I love It Can Happen. I love Changes.
It Can Happen is probably right up there with my favorite songs on the album. I love that they work a sitar into It Can Happen. I mean, talk about a sound out of time, but it works beautifully. That's a beautifully arranged song. Hold On is where the lyrics kind of drag it down. Their music's sounding a lot simpler, but they're still playing a lot of tricky changes.
Yeah.
There's some interesting rhythmic tricks on that track. But that's one where the lyrics just drag it down for me.
One of the things I think that's really cool about most of the songs on this album, but It Can Happen especially, when you watch them live, like the 90112 Live DVD that is the tour from this album, you see that like John and Chris are singing together in the whole entire song of It Can Happen. The verses, the chorus, the whole thing. Chris is singing with John. And there's quite a few songs like that where either the two of them or all three of them are singing together. And they can play these songs live exactly the way they sound on the album, too, even with all the production stuff that Trevor Horn was doing.
It's funny, too. And so the peak of the album for me is the beginning of side 2. And I don't want to talk too much about it now, again, because it's going to be in 1984 when Leave It was released as a single, which is my favorite song on the album. And one of the greatest things they ever did. But you can't listen to Leave It without listening to the instrumental that precedes it, which they called Cinema.
Yeah.
And what's really cool about Cinema, the track on the album, it was recorded completely live in the studio. Now, this is a super produced album, very heavily produced by Trevor Horn. But it's cool that they had this one track where it's just these guys live in the studio, no overdubs, and just showing off their absolute brilliance. It's just an incredible instrumental track.
Yeah, I think they won a Grammy for that song, too, actually, for Best Instrumental.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then our song comes after that. And I think I really appreciate this track more than I did previously because the just a super killer groove on it. Even the dumb lyrics don't get in the way because the groove is so good. And we've said that several times before in the podcast that lyrics can spoil a good song, but if the song is good enough, if the music is good enough,
you can look past it.
you can look. And here's a perfect example. They're getting into that great groove. Toledo was just another stop along the good King's Highway. My fortification took me by surprise and hit me, sending me sideways. Scan's amazing with the rhythm, but what the hell is he talking about? It means something to John, I'm sure.
Yeah.
His lyrics are to fit in. They don't mean anything necessarily. They might mean something to him, or the occasional phrase might have some meaning.
Yeah, they're just meant to fit in musically.
They're meant to fit in musically. They scan. The rhythm of the words perfectly fits the rhythm of the groove on that song, which makes it work. And then you've got Hearts, which closes out the album, which plods along, plods and plods. And then you get to the chorus, and it's like, oh, the chorus is beautiful.
It's so uplifting in the chorus.
Yes.
With all three vocalists again singing together. Yeah. Well, in City of Love, the song before that, is definitely the most rockin' song and one of the most rockin' songs they've ever done.
Yeah.
And I really like it. It's got big drums and rock riffs, but it's funny. There's a little clip I saw of behind the scenes when they were filming 9012 Live. Trevor Rabin says how it just sounds so metal and it's just so boring. And I think the audience is bored. And I'm like, really? Because he goes off on that song live and it's like a showcase for him. And here he is saying that he thinks it's boring. But it does have a much harder song than anything else on this album or anything they've ever done, really.
Yeah.
Owner of a Lonely Heart really is one of those songs that was completely built. It was.
What an opening. The crashing drum sound to open that.
Yeah. And then the like fuzz rock sound of the guitar. And then it just switches to that clean guitar sound with the really crisp drums. And the band really, really fought against this song. And starting with the drums. And not only is it just the most simple drums on any Yes song ever, but it's a drum loop, which they just were like, no, we're not going to do that, And Trevor had to fight to make this happen. He wanted the snare tuned really high because he was at the time really into Stuart Copeland and the Police and Synchronicity. He loved Stuart Copeland's drum sound.
Police were hugely influential on the prog bands in their transition to the 80s sound. Huge.
Yes. And Stuart Copeland was a big piece of that.
And the production.
Yeah. So he tuned the snare really high to get that real crisp, clean snare sound. And then he had Alan play just the basic beat. And then the other part of this too is you get those, which Trevor Horn calls whiz bangs, like the all the little
early sampling synthesizer technology there. Trevor Horn's just on the cutting edge here with the tech he's using.
Mm-hmm. And another thing too is that you've got Tony Kaye as the keyboardist in this band, who is a very old school Hammond B. That's all he wants. In fact, that's one of the reasons why he was kicked out of the band in the first place. Steve Howe wanted to bring in more Moog and more like technology, and Tony Kaye wanted nothing to do with that. He's like, no, I like my Hammond B. That's where I'm comfortable.
So it was Steve Howe's urging to bring in the synthesizer technology back in the early 70s?
It was Steve Howe, and that's what pushed Tony out initially.
That's interesting because he's never. I don't know anything about his use of keyboards. I mean,
I think he just wanted something that was a more interesting, different sound. He wanted to expand it, And when they brought Tony Kaye back in for this iteration of the band, they kind of wanted something a little simpler. They wanted, because, Trevor's a pretty flashy guitarist. But when Trevor Horn came in, he really butted heads with Tony Kaye and basically told them, you need to send Tony home, because he heard Trevor Rabin play a piece on the piano and he was like, why aren't you doing the keyboards? So he basically pushed Tony Kaye out. So Trevor does most of the keyboards, actually, Trevor Rabin, on this album. So anyway, Trevor Horn brought in all those sampled sounds, which was very his style at that time. Because, at the same time that he's mixing and recording, he's also doing Art of Noise, which I don't know if you remember, like Close to the Edit was a song that was played on MTV all the time. which is all of that. It's just all these sampled sounds. And also, he was like really big into that. And that was kind of his signature sound.
Yeah, ultra modern stuff at this time. This is brand new technology being utilized.
Yeah. So he brought this into Owner of a Lonely Heart. And when the band was initially working on the song, Trevor Horn kept getting so frustrated with them because they kept wanting to play all these flourishes, and Alan would be playing all these fills and he's like, no. I don't want that. I just want it simple. And it's like they just couldn't do it, like they couldn't help themselves. So that's why Trevor just ended up using the drum loop.
So Owner of a Lonely Heart is the song we're putting on the playlist, the big hit single. They hit number one with that.
Their only number one single in the US.
Who could have seen that coming? In 1983, after their two previous albums were Drama, which alienated their hardcore fan base because you no longer had John Anderson in the band. They're bringing in the Buggles, and people were like, what the hell are they doing? And then prior to that, Tormato, which is just a turd of an album.
Yes.
And, prog rock could not be less fashionable. Although in 1983, there's a developing movement where it's kind of coming back. And there are only a couple of bands broke through commercially, but there's this Neo Prog movement that really starts to take hold in 1983. Before we talk about that, though, we got to talk about the Genesis album. Now, we've spent so much time here on Yes, but so Genesis had already made this 80s transition well in advance of Yes, and had success with Abacab, which was a great album in 1981. But even really in the late 70s, they're starting to make this move toward a more streamlined, pop-oriented sound. After Peter Gabriel leaves the group, then Phil Collins takes over on vocals. And then with the departure of Steve Hackett, they're paring things down, making things simpler.
And then there were three.
Yes, and then there were three. My first introduction to Genesis would have been the Misunderstanding single.
Yeah.
Off the Duke album in 1980. Amazing they never got sued by Sly and the Family Stone for the blatant ripoff. But the Genesis album, they're still working with Hugh Padgham, who produced the Abacab record. They love the drum sounds that he was coming up with. It started with the Peter Gabriel third record in 1980. Hugh Padgham was the engineer. Steve Lillywhite was the producer. They stumbled upon this incredible drum sound that would really be influential throughout the 1980s. Hugh Padgham probably deserves the most credit for that, although I think he and Steve Lillywhite have gone back and forth, saying who's more responsible for that. But Phil Collins certainly knew the score because he's like, I want the guy who's on the knobs to produce my solo record because I want to get that drum sound in the air tonight.
Which became like a signature sound for him.
Right.
Really.
So then you got the Genesis self-titled album, which starts with Mama, which was a big hit in England.
Yeah.
It was their biggest hit in England.
So surprising to me that
it is surprising that was a hit because it's a dark song. It is dark. It's sinister sounding. And it's right.
Oh.
You've got a world-class drummer in Phil Collins, but it's all based around a Lindrum loop that Mike Rutherford came up with.
Yeah.
So that's the intro to the song. It's very minimal sounding. Here you're getting a little bit of the Prince influence too. I mean, Prince with his really pared back, keyboard-oriented sound, very influential. And then the last thing you would think Genesis would be influenced by would be rap music. But what do we come to learn about that laugh that Sheryl just mentioned?
Yeah.
So we're talking about after the chorus, and Phil Collins just sings his ass off on this record.
Yes.
Particularly this track. I mean, he's really pushing. Such a great, soulful singer.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing to think that he was in the band all along. Peter Gabriel leaves the group, another guy with a lot of soul influence in his vocal style. And they auditioned over 100 guys to take his place. And all the while, here's Phil Collins sitting back
behind the kid.
Right. It's like, well, we'll just let him sing. It turned out to be a pretty good move for their bank accounts. But he's just absolutely pushing his voice to the limit on this song. And then you get to the end of the chorus, Mama, Mama. And then the laugh. Oh, it's just so sinister sounding.
Yes.
But they got it from Melly Mel, Grandmaster Flash, The Furious Five, The Message. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. They just picked up on that laugh. So that's kind of cool. Maybe we could do something with that. I never knew that, but
I
that's
didn't either.
very curious aspect of it. Um, this is a great record,
Yeah.
really is. I hadn't listened to it for a long time, but going back and listening, I mean, for me, it is a 5-star album till the end of side 2. The last 2 tracks,
Yeah.
Silver Rainbow in particular, just really. What is a silver rainbow? I'm talking about a word that means nothing. A rainbow is a spectrum of colors. How can you have a silver
There's no
rainbow?
silver in there.
What is a silver rainbow? It's just a
This
weird
is one of
song.
those songs I've never really listened to the lyrics because it's a weird song. It's got a very heavy sound.
It's the most prog song on the record.
It is. It's the most prog. It sounds more like a Peter Gabriel solo thing, I think, in a way.
Well, it's definitely a Tony Banks song for sure.
The problem with it has some interesting changes, but it's so clunky and repetitive that it's just like, oh, enough already.
There's not a bad song on the record.
No.
It's great. The record is brilliant up until Silver Rainbow. And then that kind of, and then
it's got to get better.
It's going to get better. Again, it's okay. It's great.
It's going to get better to me. Sounds like adult contemporary.
Yeah.
It's like very light and it doesn't really fit on the album.
So the album kind of ends with a whimper, not a bang. So that keeps it from being a 5-star record overall for me. But up until that point, holy crap. Side 1, wow. So you've got Mama, which is very heavy. It's got that Hugh Padgham drum sound in excelsis. They're using the Lynn drums and the Simmons drum pads at the same time, but it's very artfully deployed on this album. So there's another record that came out in 1983, Heart's album this year, Passionworks. The Simmons drums are all over that album, and it is so annoying.
Yeah.
Because the drummer isn't any good. I mean, Phil Collins is a great
problem.
Yeah. And the production isn't as good. So you've got a great producer in Hugh Padgham, you've got a brilliant drummer in Phil Collins, and they're utilizing this new technology in a very artful way on this record. It's heavy, and it's in your face, and it's really cool sounding. Whereas on the Heart album, first of all, most of the songs are terrible. And the drums just stick out like a sore thumb.
Well, and that's the thing. You can't blame the Simmons drums for the, terrible sounds of the 80s. It plays a part in it.
Sure.
But a lot of the drummers that are using them, like Bill Bruford, really utilize them a lot.
Well, and used them a lot on the 90125 album.
Them a lot. They're using them in conjunction with acoustic drums. They're using them, like as part of the soundscape. It's not the drum sound only. And that's where I think, a lot of these 80s albums like the Heart album get a bad rap because of the drums, because they're just using it as the drum sound.
And they're thinking, wait till people get a load of this. I mean, this we're on the cutting edge here. And then you listen to the album, it's like, what is going on with the drums? It's just terrible.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Mama, very heavy track to open the album. Big hit in England. It was the first single here too, but it didn't go anywhere. The next single was That's All, which is the next song on the record. Great song.
Yeah.
And here you've got, again, your world-class drummer, Phil Collins, but the simplest, it's a 2/4 beat. It's like a country rhythm. And he said he was really thinking about country songs when he would play that rhythm. But then the song goes along. It's a fairly simple sounding song with this 2/4 rhythm. But as the song goes along, now you start to see what makes Phil Collins such a great drummer. And I think Mick Fleetwood is the master of this too. You don't notice, unless you're really paying attention, you don't notice what he's doing because it sounds just like a simple, basic rhythm. But a song like Dreams by Fleetwood Mac, I think that's an absolute one of the greatest drum tracks in the history of popular music, just for the subtlety of it and just the little fills.
The thing about those songs is that, like, when you hear someone else play it or like a cover band, it doesn't sound right.
It's
like, no, they can't get it. It's either it's the subtle fills, but it's also the actual feel. Like there's a feel behind it. Mick Fleetwood definitely has that.
And I'd never noticed this until we started prepping for this episode. Going back and I'm listening to That's All. He's really doing a Ringo here. It's a Ringo Starr tribute. His fills in particular.
Yeah.
Total Ringo. And that was his mindset here. Ringo Starr was a big influence on his drumming style, and he was consciously trying to play like Ringo on this record.
Mm-hmm.
So the rhythm is simple to start, but by the end of the song, it's just kind of morphing into something else, but very subtly. So you don't really notice it unless you're paying attention.
Yeah.
On the bridge section, particularly, he's doing the typical Ringo fills. And then I think the song is kind of take off on Hello Goodbye a little bit in the lyrics, just like the opposites. That's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
yeah. So it's kind of like their little Beatles tribute. It's a really cool song.
Yeah, I think they intended to write a song in the style of the Beatles,
Yeah.
and I think they pulled it off. And it is definitely up to this point their most accessible song,
Yeah.
one of their best songs. The bouncy piano, which sounds very Paul McCartney piano, and there's a reason why this was their biggest hit in the US.
And then you got Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea. So this is, again, going back to longer epic length songs, but more streamlined rhythms. Again, they're using a lot of the electronic drums and simple 4/4 here, but they create a beautiful mood with this track. It's an
Mhm.
interesting lyric. You're trying to figure out what it's about. I guess they said it's telling a story about a burglar breaking into a home only to find that it's haunted by ghosts, and they kind of trap him in their world and tell him their stories, which is kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah,
But it takes you on a journey, and this was an FM rock staple in the mid '80s.
it was, and they'd play
Yeah,
the whole thing. I mean,
right,
both
yes,
and Second Home by the Sea, and it was long. And the Second Home by the Sea definitely has a hauntingness about it that
yes.
makes sense with that, that storyline.
But again, it's based around a pretty simple programmed drum rhythm from
Mhm.
the Lynn drum with Simmons on top. So it's almost all electronic drums.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You can tell most specifically on that track, the genesis of the Genesis album was them jamming. They had their own home studio at this point, so they could take as much time as they wanted without worrying about studio bills. And they all got together and just started jamming around in the studio. And that's how these songs came about, through jam sessions.
Yeah, in fact, I think Phil said Home by the Sea, either Mike or Tony was just playing a riff and he just started singing Home by the Sea. And then, that was the chorus.
Yeah, and the lyrics to Mama, you kind of wonder, God, what inspired this? Because Phil was going through personal turmoil in his relationships during this period of time. You
Yeah.
went, God, this guy's really tormented. I mean, he is out there on the edge on this
Yeah.
song. But he said basically it's just improvised. They came around as kind of a weird storyline about a
A
a, a,
prostitute.
a teenager obsessing about an older prostitute. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's interesting, but
Yeah.
at first he's just, he's just extemporizing with the lyrics, and then it kind of built from that.
Well, and that's why I think Mama and Home by the Sea to me are more just vibe songs.
Yes. Yes.
It's just about the sound and like the feel behind it. And it really, I don't pay any attention to the lyrics.
Yeah, but it packs a wallop. It really does.
Yeah.
Again, that's credit to the production skills of Hugh Padgham, who is basically on the top of the heap at this point. I mean, when you've got Synchronicity and the Genesis album both coming out in 1983, this is a guy who's really on top of the world in the producer's chair. Side 2 starts great too. Now, Illegal Aliens got a little controversy attached to it.
Yeah.
But, this is a song that people are reluctant to revisit. I think the video probably really buried this song, where you got Phil Collins and the mustache. That maybe pushes it a little too far. But I think the song itself, it's too bad because it's a really cool song.
I think it's just too silly.
But I like it because of that, I think.
I've never been a fan of the song.
And then after that, though, you want to talk about killer grooves. Just a Job to Do. Holy smokes.
That is my favorite song on the album. I love that song so much.
Phil Collins is on fire on that track.
Yes. I think it's kind of reminiscent of stuff from Abacab. Like it has the horn punches and like the swirly guitar and synths going in the background. It's the most rock song on the album. And I love Phil's vocals. Yeah, I love this song. This is my favorite song on the album.
Yeah, this is the song that, upon revisitation of this album, has probably jumped farthest in my appreciation, just because it just kicks ass. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, it does. It's always been one of my favorite songs, but listening to it again, I'm like, oh, God, this is such a great song. Yeah.
And then, again, the last 2 tracks...
Well, you forgot about Taking It All Too Hard.
Oh, yeah, that's a good ballad.
It's a nice ballad. Yes. It's pretty. But then, you get into the last 2, and it's kind of like...
Yeah, and again, on their own... They're fine. They're not bad songs, but the album had a certain momentum up to Silver Rainbow, and then it just it loses it at the end of the record. So great album overall, but not quite a 5-star album just because they can't maintain to the finish. A great album has to end with a bang.
Yeah.
Like, Champagne Supernova closing out What's the Story? You got to have a killer song to close the record. It's an editing sequencing flaw, I guess, on this record, but otherwise, great album. And certainly in contention for one of my favorites of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. I think it still holds up, except for Illegal Alien. But yeah, it still holds up. And, at this time too, Phil Collins has been extremely successful with his solo career. He had a number one with You Can't Hurry Love in the UK in 83. Like he's riding high. And he could have easily just been like, Genesis, I'm done with you guys. I can do this alone. I don't need you, but he's always had that place in his heart for the band, which at that time is still just the three of them. I don't know. I just think it's cool that Phil continued with them. They didn't really do anything after this that I cared for much, but the fact that they continued, and also the fact that Tony and Mike Rutherford then went on to do Mike and the Mechanics, which is very mainstream pop music. But I still think it's cool that they didn't feel overshadowed either by Phil Collins. He hadn't become a super, super duper star yet, because that would happen with No Jacket Required in a couple years. But still, he was definitely riding high. And they were just kind of the other guys,
So Genesis, I think really they set the template for the 70s prog bands smoothly transitioning into more relevance in the 80s with the change in musical fashion.
Yeah.
They were well ahead of Yes in that regard.
Yeah.
They were already making that transition in the late 70s, where it took a couple of stumbles for Yes, even though we both loved the drama album. And the drama album, far from being, what's Yes, a new wave band now? That album is as proggy as just about anything they put out.
Yeah.
There is all kinds of tricky stuff on that record.
Oh, yeah. I don't see that steering away from prog at all.
No, it's just a different vocal sound. Obviously, there's more changes than that, but I think hearing the different voice is what mainly put people off on that record.
And the Buggles weren't just a new wave band either.
No.
They were
very progressive.
Extremely experimental.
Yeah, but I find it interesting. So you've got Genesis going from, with Peter Gabriel, these long, sidelong epics and classical flourishes and technically challenging pieces, into this more streamlined three-piece in the 80s. But at the same time, you've got this Neo Prog wave of bands bubbling up in 82 and 83. And it seems like by far and away the biggest influence on these bands was Genesis, but not the newer Genesis, the older Genesis sound.
The Peter Gabriel Genesis.
Right.
And especially in the vocals for a lot of these bands, they sound like they're trying to sound like Peter Gabriel. Yeah. And, these up and coming bands, I think they're people who grew up with Yes and Genesis. And that was, the stuff they were listening to as young people. And it's kind of funny to me how this new wave of bands started to come in doing, like you said, the sound of the prog sound that had become not cool anymore, become passe, started to fade away. It's almost like how disco did that, how like bands that were still incorporating disco, even though actual disco artists were being shunned. It never went away. Well, that's kind of the same thing with prog.
Disco's dead. Nope, never did die.
Never did die.
Just changed his clothes.
Yeah. And the same kind of thing was happening here, where although these bands may have been a little more blatantly influenced by Genesis particularly, there's a handful of bands at the time that were just starting out. Really, the Neo Prog 82 is about the very beginning of it, and it started to ramp up more into the 80s. The biggest bands probably from the 80s, Marillion is definitely became the most popular, and IQ, which both of those bands, the two lead singers sound a lot like Peter Gabriel.
Yeah, so I just listened to a little bit of both of those. Fish, the lead singer, at least at the outset for Marillion, in their early albums. I'm not sure when he left the band. Would he leave?
He left in 1987. Their Clutching at Straws was the last album he did.
So my first impression listening to him is like, okay, this is Peter Gabriel without the soul. It's just not as good a vocal. IQ, this sounds like somebody doing a Peter Gabriel impression. It's very close to his sound. And musically, they're definitely drawing from the Genesis well. The IQ album from 83 starts with a 20-minute epic, and it's pretty cool, actually.
It is. I think it's great. Yeah. And they hit their stride in 85 with The Wake, which is like a classic Neo Prog album. But I listened to a lot of less known albums from this time and kind of what was just bubbling up. And yes, they do sound a lot like Genesis. And yes, from the 70s, you can tell that these guys are young and they're still learning their craft. It's a lot less technical. The two biggest things that stand out to me are the vocalists. A lot of them are just not very good.
Yeah.
They don't have strong voices. They're trying to, they're really pushing their vocals, but it's not there. And the drums. A lot of the drums are like really basic. And one of the things listening to these neo prog bands too that makes me realize is just how good Yes and Genesis were.
Right.
These guys were amazing musicians, and you don't get that with the neo prog stuff. But one thing that you get with the neo prog that you didn't get with a lot of the early prog, the lyrics. The lyrics are a lot more interesting, and they're actually, they're really trying to say something. They're more kind of personal.
Yeah. Certainly with Marillion, the lyrics are very intriguing.
Yes. And that's one of the biggest draws, I think, to Marillion. I am a fan of the Fish era Marillion, but mostly going into the 85 and 87 albums. And Fish definitely improves as a vocalist as he goes on, because I don't really care for the first album that much. It's mostly because of the vocals.
Yeah.
But the songwriting is just top tier. It really is. And that's something that I think
Fish himself looks back and has trouble listening to his voice on that first.
He sees the progression of his vocals as he goes along.
I think he was quoted as saying, I was young. I didn't understand about how you got to sing in the appropriate key. I was singing way too high.
Yeah.
Trying this falsetto thing that didn't work. So he definitely improved.
Yeah, and I love his solo albums too, and that's where he really shines to me. But a lot of these guys are probably trying to sound like John Anderson, it's like that means singing way up in the upper atmosphere, and it's just nearly impossible to do. And that's the other thing too that makes me just appreciate so much of these older prog bands is God, the vocals are so incredible. And it really does make the band in a lot of ways. There's a band called 12th Night that Steven Wilson had remixed their first album, which surprised me because I didn't really know a lot about them. Oh my gosh, they're definitely a Genesis of the Steve Hackett era Genesis, but the vocals, I just can't. They don't do it for me at all. And, I think I just found that in a lot of these albums that the vocals were just kind of a turnoff.
Plus, it sounds like, these newer bands that are popping up in 82 and 83, Marillion, IQ, et cetera, these are the early records and it's kind of baby steps. Their best music was really yet to come. It's still kind of bubbling up in this period of time, but certainly nothing worthy of us placing on the playlist at this point.
No, not on the playlist. I actually think Marillion's first single, there was a song called Grendel that's like a 17-minute song that was on the B side of the 12-inch. That is really cool. That's the best thing they did in this era, and that came out in 82. But no, they're finding their footing. A lot of these are very DIY. They sound like, demos almost or home recordings, and they're not getting the support. They're not getting label support. They're just starting out, and the neo prog movement will start to gain momentum and really build up into the 90s. And I'm so glad that it did happen, though, because it kept prog alive and it kept prog going into the future, into now, which there's so much happening in the prog world. And it's a combination of still older bands like Yes, if you can still call them Yes. I mean, there's actually no original members of Yes in the
Chris Squire was the one that was the constant presence from the very beginning until he passed
Steve
away.
Howe is still in the band, actually. Yeah. I shouldn't say that. Steve Howe is still in the band, and it was Steve and Chris for a long time. But I still do think it's kind of funny that the bands that were making this music and were making the best of this music all through the 70s felt like they had to pull away from it and start moving more toward, mainstream rock and pop, which they did, and they did successfully. Asia was extremely successful.
That album doesn't really feel very proggy to me. I mean, it's just a mainstream AOR record.
It is, but it comes from prog artists, and you have someone like Steve Howe in that band who doesn't sound at all like he did in Yes. But, there was a lot of other bands too, like Styx, they're doing Mr. Roboto in 1983. Pink Floyd isn't even a band anymore. Roger Waters has just commandeered that band, and he's just doing a solo album under their name.
The final cut, we're kind of giving that short shrift. Pink Floyd's kind of an interesting, I mean, they get lumped in with the prog bands, but they're kind of on their own island.
They're more like an art rock band. They're not really a prog band.
Yeah, the musical dexterity isn't the same. David Gilmour is obviously a top flight guitarist,
Yeah.
but not in the Steve Howe mold. I mean, he can't play like that.
He's more atmospheric and
Yes,
more,
and
yeah.
melodic and just
Mhm.
some of the greatest guitar solos in the history of rock, just
Yeah.
beautifully composed, but not, showing off his chops necessarily. He's more about sound and feel and melody. Roger Waters, no great shakes as a bass player.
No.
Richard Wright, had some classical training, but he's no Rick Wakeman, that's for sure. So, I mean, they're
And Nick
more.
Mason is about the most basic drummer
Yes,
ever.
exactly.
Yeah.
So they get lumped in with Prog because of the lofty concepts behind their albums more than anything else, less about the music. And then their album, as you mentioned, the final cut comes out in 1983. Probably shouldn't have had the Pink Floyd name on it. It probably should have been a Roger Waters solo
He
record.
wrote every song on the album, and it's a tough listen.
Yeah, it's
Although I actually,
arduous. I
yeah,
mean, it has its moments.
it does. I actually like it a lot. I mean, I've
Yeah.
listened to it quite a lot, but yeah, it's certainly not an easy listen.
We should talk about King Crimson, though, because that's a really interesting transition. And again, this whole mythology about, punk and new wave wiping out the prog bands, they're really starting to peter out already before punk hits. I mean, prog had really had its peak moment probably in 72, I would say, 73, around there. By 75, Yes has kind of splintered off and done their solo albums. King Crimson was pretty much done by 74. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, they put out the Love Beach album in 78.
Yeah.
They're pretty much done before the end of the 70s. But then King Crimson reunites, and it wasn't going to be called, it was like Yes, it was going to be, Robert Fripp was going to have this new group, and they were going to be Discipline, right? Wasn't that going to
Yeah.
be the name of the
Yeah.
band?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've already talked about that record because that was Mike's album pick of 81. But they put out this trio of albums. No album in 83, but they put out Discipline in 81, Beat in 82, and then Three of a Perfect Pair in 1984. So they've modernized their sound, but they haven't streamlined it quite to the extent of Genesis and Yes. They're still a very, very tricky proposition.
Yeah. Also, I think they kind of will start to fall more into the art rock category too, more than prog, because they've got Adrian Belew coming from Talking Heads, working with Zappa, people like that. So he's really driving the band in that era. They're still doing some really interesting and complicated things, but it's, a lot of ways far removed from what they were doing in the 70s. And I think because you do have that new wave influence, they were able to do it because they changed, but King Crimson was always a constant changing animal. They're not a static band. They've always kind of been moving forward.
Yeah, just all revolves around Robert Fripp.
Yep. And Robert Fripp, still the backbone of the 80s King Crimson. But, like I said, when you bring Adrian Belew into the mix, you've got now that art rock viewpoint that really changed them. Mike Oldfield, he's got an album that came out in 1983. The first side is a 20-minute piece that is pretty prog. But the second side, they had a big pop hit single from that album that was like a UK top 10 called Moonlight Shadow. Maggie Riley, female singer. It sounds nothing like anything else on the album. It's like, oh, what just happened? This is now like a pop single on this album, So I think some of the artists, they're still kind of doing some of the more extended pieces and things like that. That's not what's giving them attention. It's the shorter pop songs like Genesis, That's All.
Yep.
That is a pure pop song. There's nothing prog about that. If you just came into knowing both Yes and Genesis with Owner of a Lonely Heart and That's All, you would have no thoughts whatsoever that these were anything but just pop bands.
And I didn't. My teenage self, or whatever, however low, 12, 13, then it was like, these are just cool songs that I want to have.
Yeah.
I didn't know what prog rock was.
Yeah, that was definitely the case for a lot of people. There was this division. I heard this radio interview with Trevor Rabin that this guy did with Trevor Rabin, and he was talking about back in, at this time when Yes was turning over into what they were with 90125. There was kind of this division in the fan base. There was the Troopers and the Generators. The Troopers were the original fans from the 70s, and the generators were the new fans that came in the 80s after 90125. Have you heard this?
No, but Starship Trooper is my favorite Yes song.
Okay, so you actually heard Yes talking about this in that live video where they say that there's, the young people in the concerts, they're in the front and they're like into the music, and then they're complaining about the troopers who are just sitting there watching, not getting into the music at all. And they like the young people that are getting into the show.
Yeah, the troopers patiently waiting for the end of the show when the old classics get played.
Yes, and you can just see the divide right there.
And you had ex-members of bands, like Steve Hackett and Anthony Phillips and Steve Hillage, all putting out solo records through the 80s that kept prog alive.
Kept prog alive, but were not in the mainstream in any way, and really weren't popular. Not like their bands were popular in the 70s. Like, this music in the 70s was popular music, the prog stuff that was coming out. Now they're just kind of on the fringes. Yeah, they're putting out solo albums. They're not really a going concern like they were.
Jethro Tull's continuing to put out albums in the 1980s. I know A was a pretty big seller for them in 1980.
That came out in 1980.
I never really got into that record. It got good reviews.
It was initially supposed to be an Ian Anderson solo album, but then the label talked them into making it a Jethro Tull album, and it sounds nothing like their older stuff. Ian Anderson also had a solo album that came out in 83 called Walk Into the Light, which I really like, and it's very synthesizer-based, modern synthesizer for the 80s. Doesn't sound like anything they were doing in the past. They were still making music and they were still popular until Under Wraps came out in 1984, and everybody just started hating on them because they used a drum machine instead of a real drummer for the whole album.
Why did we ever unwrap this piece of crap?
Yes.
Let's keep it under wraps.
But the Moody Blues are still making albums.
That's an interesting. So, Long Distance Voyager was a big hit record for them. Early in the 80s. The Voice was a top 10 hit single in the United States. Gemini Dream, great song off that record.
Love that song. And videos on MTV, you were seeing videos of them. Yeah.
And then The Present comes out in 1983, and I listened to that for the first time, and it's not as strong a record as Long Distance Voyager, but it's definitely interesting in its own way. You've got the melodic Justin Hayward songs. You got the more kind of prog-oriented Ray Thomas songs at the end. And then John Lodge has a song on there, which was a moderate hit. I think it hit 22 on the charts.
Sitting at the Wheel.
Sitting at the Wheel. It's an interesting song. I don't recall hearing that at all.
It sounds like ELO.
Yes, it does. It sounds a lot like ELO. And of course, ELO had Secret Messages out in 1983.
Yeah, I really like that album, actually. It's less experimental. It's more kind of rock. It sounds like it could be a George Harrison album to me. But, it's still good. And both of those albums, especially the Moody Blues album, sounds really good.
Yes.
Did you notice that? I was like, wow, when that one came on, it just jumped out of the speakers.
I listened to it late at night, but on the stereo. So I haven't cranked it. But yeah, it's definitely a mood piece. No pun intended. But it just sets a nice, relaxing mood. The songs don't grab you, but it's a really pleasant listen from start to finish. It's an interesting record.
Yeah.
And I'll certainly go back and spin that more.
And, Alan Parsons Project had a huge hit with Eye in the Sky in 82, not prog. They were definitely going way more. They were pretty mainstream anyway, and they had rock hits, but still veering away from the longer songs.
We will definitely be talking about them when we get into 1984 with the Ammonia Avenue record, which I had as a lad, and a song on there that I absolutely loved and still love to this day.
Yeah.
But as far as 1983, prog's not dead. It's still out there. It's, changed its stripes a little bit. But top of the heap, Yes and Genesis with 90125 and the self-titled album. And we are putting Owner of a Lonely Heart, Yes's only number one hit record, on our playlist for 1983. So we're just about to the end of 83. We've got a couple more episodes to go. We want to talk about MTV and its influence. We're going to pick 4 artists who got the biggest boost from MTV in their careers. I've already picked mine 2.
Okay, I guess I better pick 2.
I may change my mind on them, but I'm set on 2 right now. Sheryl will come up with 2, and we'll talk about the early years of MTV and how that impacted the music business. And then we will wrap things up as we'll bring Sheryl's husband, Mike, on board. He'll have his album and Song of the Year for 1983. I'll pick my album of the year. And I've delayed my album pick because the album came out late in the year. But I've stayed pretty true to it, although there are a couple of potential contenders that could change my mind. I already referenced one, The Police with Synchronicity. We'll obviously have to talk more about that record before we get on 1983 because it was so huge and so great. So that's what we got coming up before we wrap up the year 1983. But we are almost to the apex of our project, which will peak in 85 and 86, the years that Sheryl and I were both in high school.
You say almost, but those are probably still going to be like 20 episodes away.
Yes.
Considering how many we've done for each year.
We're only 2 years away from it.
Okay, there you go.
Several episodes to go before we get there. And we've been bracing for the challenge because I think both Sheryl and I realized by the time we get to 85 and 86, popular music has taken a turn for the worse at this point. There are still plenty of great songs to be had.
I'm excited for the challenge now, actually. I keep getting more and more into this, just, discovering things that I didn't care for at the time or know about. So I think it's exciting.
And as a nerdy early pressing CD collector, obviously CDs came out. We haven't talked about that. As CDs came out at the end of 82, really didn't show up in this country until 83. And then even then, it was super expensive equipment. The discs themselves were probably like $19, $20 at retail at this point, and not a whole lot of titles were available. But CDs have arrived on the scene. So I have acquired tons of pop music from 85 and 86 in recent years. A lot of it I haven't listened to yet. So that's going to be exciting for me to be motivated to go and actually listen to these things.
To listen to your collection.
See if there's anything of value to be had in a lot of these things that I've bought.
Silver Platters is celebrating their 40th anniversary this year.
Isn't that amazing?
Which tells you that 1985 is, when they were on the cutting edge of only selling CDs and laser videos.
Right.
And, CDs were just starting to become one of the most popular formats and the most popular eventually. But yeah, so, 85 is kind of right there and when the CD was at its height.
So yeah, lots of interesting stuff to come on this long and winding project that is Matt and Sheryl's Gen Excellent playlist. But we thank you for tuning in once again. Hope to meet you again down the road. I'm Matt.
I'm Sheryl.
Take care, everybody.